I will introduce Susan. Dr. Susan Schneider's years of experience in climate change work include behavior change projects, academic and non-academic publications, community organizing and outreach, and public speaking. As senior scientist for the nonprofit Root Solutions, Schneider did sustainability work for UC Berkeley and for the Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Education. She co-authored 2 chapters in its new guidebook, Making Shift Happen, Designing for Successful Environmental Behavior Change. Recent outreach includes a podcast for the Union of Concerned Scientists on learning principles for community climate action. She has an award-winning trade book, The Science of Consequences, and it covers her academic specialty of basic learning principles, their role in nature-nurture relations, and their applications, including sustainability. Schneider is a faculty member at Western and serves on its climate change working group. She also serves on the Tools for Change landmark peer review panel for climate change. And with that, Susan, take it away.
Thank you very much, Nikki. Can everyone hear me first of all? And then can everyone see my screen?
Yeah, yes. I can see.
Okay, excellent. Thank you all for being here. I read this book last year, and I think it's a resource that's good to know about. Okay, hang on a second. There we go. It's very empowering, I think, to see what has worked elsewhere and how much progress that municipalities across this country are making. And this book is a workbook giving all the details of every step along the way, including implementation and monitoring progress, with lots of examples from municipalities of all sizes across the United States. And it includes a lot of examples of how citizens and nonprofits like KCCC and our affiliates can be involved. This is the table of contents. It is an over 300-page book, so I'm just going to have time today to give some highlights. And I'm not going to spend too much time at the beginning. Where are we locally? The city of Kalamazoo already has a climate action plan, the sustainability plan, and other areas, other municipalities in our area are not quite that far along, but they're getting there, like the county. We have these 2 new hires now, Justin and Taylor for the city and the county focused on sustainability. So I'll give a few examples from that. I'll focus more, though, on the rest of the book, including Appendix B and Chapter 3, which has a lot about public participation and what other municipalities and other groups like ours have been doing. And that includes helping to create and disseminate public outreach materials like this. The city of Flagstaff is similar in size to Kalamazoo and Portage. And they developed the whole climate action guide for the public, a community climate action guide. And this flyer was part of it. And a lot of that, of course, applies generally across municipalities. Not so much the conserving water part for us. We are not Arizona. From what I gather, we're more likely to have problems with too much water and flooding. But still, gives you an idea and a nice sample to help use as a model. Greenhouse gas inventories quantify where the greenhouse gas pollution emissions are. So numbers across the spectrum in the area that's being covered, not just the direct emissions, but the indirect as well, usually. this is where we are with the city of Kalamazoo, and Justin, of course, is going to be talking about just this topic in 2 weeks on Fridays for Future. I hope many of you will be able to come to that. This is an essential step, and citizen groups certainly can have some role in tracking what's going on and in prioritizing. I've got a future slide on that. Anyway, ICLEI is a big nonprofit that helps local governments accomplish things like this, and their ClearPath software is one of the main methods used for greenhouse gas inventories for many cities and towns in the United States. There's a coverage of this in the book. And what is included in greenhouse gas inventories actually varies. It's not just kind of set in stone. The direct emissions generally are covered, that's scope 1. Scopes 2 and 3 are more indirect emissions, and how far you go in that direction really depends on a lot of factors, which I'm not going to get into. The book gets into it a bit. Oh, I meant to mention, by the way, sorry, I forgot. Michael Boswell, the author of the first author of the book. Let me go back here. There, you can read his name there. He is a professor of planning for California Polytechnic University, as is the second author, Adrian Grieve. And Michael Boswell has served as an expert advisor on climate action planning for the United Nations. So he certainly has good credentials. The second author has served as project director for the state of California's adaptation planning guide for climate change. And then the third author is a professional consultant focused on environmental justice issues. And so let me go back then. Sorry, I forgot that. Okay. All right, so what's included very surprisingly, the book includes coverage of these different scopes and examples of what different municipalities have done, and discussion of how to get estimates where you can't get a precise figure for the amount of greenhouse gas emissions. And here is the first page, because there are multiple pages for these things, right? For the city that is blocked on my screen now. Okay, those of you who can read, what city is it again? It says on the top. Placer County, right. I've got a lot of examples in this presentation from different places. This is Placer County in California. And this shows you the first page, and this also shows the percentage change between their 2005 and their 2015 greenhouse gas inventories. They got started early, having moved from the state of California just 2 years ago. I was in the Central Valley. California has a mandate for all of their cities to have greenhouse gas inventories and climate action plans. I think that we're not there with all the states yet. Michigan, I think, is moving in that direction. Let's hope. Again, Kalamazoo City has a climate action plan, and we're working on a greenhouse gas inventory, but we're clearly not as well along as places like Placer County, where they already have a 10-year follow-up. And look at the percentage change column there. There you go, down there, between 2005 and 2015. And you can see that in almost all cases, they're able to celebrate significant progress. This is really important. It's one of the many benefits of having a greenhouse gas inventory. You're flying blind otherwise, right? How can you tell how you're going to get to net zero by 2045 or around 2050, like the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is calling for? And of course, they're calling for a 43% reduction, as many of you know, by 2030 compared to 2019. You need to have the numbers, and if you can track progress, then that's motivating, that's cause for celebration, that shows where you need to do more and where you're already doing enough and maybe don't have to devote as much resource to. So a lot of progress for Placer County. Okay, this is also an area now where community groups like KCCC can be involved. When you have a greenhouse gas inventory done, and you can see where the low-hanging fruit is, where maybe there's a lot of emissions, but cost-benefit analyses show that it's kind of iffy, or it'll take a long time for you to get some kind of payoff. Community groups can have a big impact on deciding the priorities for where the community is going to focus its resources, its funding, the amount of time that staff and other stakeholders contribute, the amount of effort that goes in. So that's one of the many benefits. The cost benefit analyses then can be done once you have the numbers for greenhouse gas emissions, and you can come up with co-benefits like new jobs, which can help get more stakeholders on board with supporting climate action. And again, community input often plays a significant role here. And evaluation criteria for this prioritizing process include, and there's another page coming here, all of these, obviously the cost that's going to be involved, any rate of return, and when you're talking energy efficiency, then there is a cost saving, so that can help make the case. The cost effectiveness of greenhouse gas reduction there, that fourth item there under that first column. Some things maybe you want to do, but they're just hugely expensive. So maybe you don't want to do them first, and maybe the cost will come down. Yeah, lots of considerations there. And then, of course, local issues for what particularly for areas in our region might want to be prioritized for other reasons. And then, okay, the benefits to disadvantaged communities, the social equity there is important. The speed of implementation, some of these things you can get very fast results and show people that and get more stakeholders on board, more support for action, more funding for action. The partnerships there, and I'm going to be talking more about that. That again is where citizen groups like KCCC and our affiliates can be involved and frequently have been involved in places that are further along with this process than we are. The longevity of benefits I wanted to comment on too. That's the bottom category. There's people in my field in psychology who focus on this because where you want there to be some kind of behavior change, you know, it's great if you get it during your project, but if it doesn't last afterwards, if you can't develop it into a new green habit, then it's not going to do much good, is it? So that's an important consideration as well. We need these things to persist so that we can get the greenhouse gas emissions down on the time schedule that the IPCC is calling for and do our part, and hopefully get all these other co-benefits too. Okay, so where the pedal hits the metal is implementation. You can have the best greenhouse gas inventory, you can have the best climate action plan, and if you don't get good implementation, then it's not going to matter much, right? So that's really critical, and there's a lot of discussion about how to make that happen in this book with, again, a lot of examples. So here's their list of keys. You don't want narrow, you want broad. You don't want just to do things that the city government itself has control over. You want local governments and school districts and healthcare systems and neighborhoods to take action too, right? Empower the staff like we are doing with the KCCC. You know, we're supporting Justin, we're supporting Taylor, we're supporting everyone who works in this area, whether they're in government or out, we're supporting each other. Okay, implementation teams are a frequent part of the process. We've already had involvement locally with the climate action planning, I know. A lot of you have been involved in that. There's also often implementation teams, so specified, that include not just government staff, but members of groups like KCCC and our affiliates, local employers, local school district heads, things like that. Okay, where you're checking on how progress is going and supporting each other and brainstorming and all of that. So that's a frequent feature. Real critical feature here, again, the funding is really important. Climate champions, a lot of you in on this call are climate champions in my view. And again, we got to support that wherever those people are, because they are leading the way. engaging the public, which we do a lot with, social media and our tabling events and our talks, etc. Fridays for Future, right? Communicate the co-benefits like the cost savings. We can help with that. We do help with that. And like the job creation and less pollution, etc. Partnerships, I'll have more to say about that. And of course, we do that with our affiliates and leading by example. We need to be role models ourselves, these organizations that are trying to take the lead here. So there are whole networks in every category you can think of to help share what works with sustainability. ASHE is one that I know about, as you heard in Nikki's introduction. And I know that Western Michigan University is a member of ASHE, and of course, Jeff knows a lot about that. And I presume K College is too. We have a local sustainable business forum. There are national forums like that that are sharing successes and useful information about going green. Same thing for local governments. There's a bunch of them at different levels. I know that Mark knows all about the Michigan Township group, Mark Miller on this call, and K-12 education, likewise, healthcare, etc. So we should be trying to spread the word about those and help implement the kinds of approaches that have already been successful elsewhere. So these partnerships, all these things that we do are just great. The tabling, all the outreach, the lobbying, etc., working with the affiliates. And this book helps us see how other municipalities have done these things and how they have involved the public. So it can be useful to help support the kinds of things we're already doing. Okay, and again, it's blocked off at the top of my screen, but I think that's Portland, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Nikki. So they again are yeah, very progressive city, got on board with climate action very early in the process, and they're already celebrating significant progress. Because this again is an excuse me, an important feature of the climate action process. Once you have a climate action plan being implemented, track it and celebrate progress and see where you're behind, and then try and catch up. And so, boy, they have a lot to celebrate. Look at all the millions of dollars that they saved over whatever this time period was. And this gets covered in the book. They had notable partnerships with community organizations that gets discussed in the book. And their advice, well, is at the bottom there. This is a quote from the book: to start with the easy things that have immediate impact. That's really sound psychologically too. If you do something that's beneficial, that's green, but you don't see the impacts until a couple of years later, that just doesn't have the same motivating power as an immediate consequence does, right? So easy things with immediate impact is nothing like planting a tree. We need to do all these other things too, but to start with, that can help. And learning from others, which again, these networks and books like these help make possible. And progress indicators, as the implementation process unfolds, include these. And there should be systems in place to help with this. Sometimes community groups can help with this too. More often, we're just involved in making sure this happens and then seeing where we're making progress and where we aren't, and then trying to readjust, because it's an iterative process, right? With the climate action, it's already been years, right? And it's going to be years more until we get where we need to be locally and nationally and globally, for that matter, right? So this book is good on being thorough about the kinds of things that are needed and how to monitor progress. And again, it's very nice to see how much Kalamazoo in particular is already doing and how much progress we've already made just from this table from the book. Now, Boulder is a city that is similar in size to Kalamazoo. So I thought that for chapter 9, which gives a number of case studies for cities of different sizes, that it would be good to look at what they've been doing. So here's another summary of how they've been doing. They already have their greenhouse gas inventories done. They're already seeing progress. And this page I thought was useful. As you noted, Boulder has a climate action plan tax. Ann Arbor has something similar that Missy Stultz has discussed. Some of you, I know, have heard that talk too from Missy at Ann Arbor. And so it is possible. I don't know if we can get something like that here, but if you can, obviously, then you have an extra source of funding and you can accomplish a lot more. And you can see that, hang on a sec here. Okay, the tax so far raised $17.3 million, and they've had a significant reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. They've gained jobs, right? 7,500, which is not insignificant. And they saw this 57% increase in gross domestic progress. This is right here, if you could see where I'm moving my cursor. Right. So that can help make the case to those who were uncertain that climate action could actually have all these co-benefits, and can be a good case for the business community. And so the Boulder voters then, as you see, approved a continuation of the tax in 2015. I also wanted to mention at the bottom here, this ordinance that they got through that helps with this problem of split incentives for rental housing, because the people who own the buildings, the landlords don't benefit when they put in extra insulation. It's the renters who are actually paying the utility bills for like heating and air conditioning who benefit. So they're less likely then to do it unless you have ordinances like this or special programs like PACE, etc. And so examples of successes in that regard are covered in the book. I like this paragraph on top there about who should be involved, as many people as possible. All the people on this call already are, good for you. And nonprofits and dedicated and informed citizenry have made a huge difference elsewhere, are making a huge difference here. And then on the same page in this chapter, this nice summary of things that can be done quickly that show an impact fairly quickly too. Things like planting trees. It's easy to recruit people to do that because you can see immediately that there's a difference. Every time you drive or walk by, you can see that tree gives you a good feeling. It's immediate, it's long lasting, and other things like that are very helpful to get a program started. And we're already well along with that here, I think. I'll let you have a second to look at that. We're doing a lot of course with transit and biking infrastructure, etc. I think we probably could do more with local food in the local grocery stores. Yeah. Okay, public participation, then there's a whole appendix on that, and there's more in some of the other chapters, chapter 3. So all of these we are doing, or we could do a kickoff event. I'm thinking now of a climate emergency month on a campus where we had Bill McKibben come in by Zoom, did a lot of publicity for that, had a lot of fancy food, and so that can help. All of these things, proven successes in getting more public participation. However, some people are really hard to reach. And this table from the book, I think, is very helpful for those who are trying to reach out to make sure that all the demographics get included when you're doing your climate action planning and your implementation, because there's a lot of barriers, right? There's barriers of income, barriers of health issues, language, if it's a second language, people who are renting versus people who are owning, etc. And so I think this table does a good job of summarizing that. In general, I was impressed by the thoroughness of this book and trying to include as much as they could think of, that is involved, that people should know about who care about climate action in their municipality. There is also a chapter on resilience. So here we're not talking about getting greenhouse gas emissions down. We're talking about dealing with the effects in the area of the climate change that's already happened or that will be happening soon. And that's going to be different for different areas, of course, but these 8 guiding principles Boswell and his co-authors suggest can help, and they have examples again in that chapter for different cities. So prioritizing the most vulnerable, using the best available science, again, taking advantage of partnerships. There's a whole science of risk management, which has really come to the fore. There's some good books about that. There's good discussion of that actually in the current book for the Climate Change Working Group reading group, our book club, 5 Times Faster by Simon Sharp. He talks about that in the beginning. Yeah, again, mutual benefits and evaluate how you're doing. Don't just say, okay, here's what we're going to do, and then do it, and then, leave it at that and expect that it's actually happening and that it's having the intended outcome. And so, yeah, this can be a whole different set of city changes and changes and things that businesses and school districts and neighborhoods do to adapt to more heat waves. If we do get more flooding, and reaching out to the public, reaching out to the especially vulnerable groups. Yeah, so a good chapter on that, I thought. And there's a nice section with resources at the end. I'm going to highlight here resources for chapter 5. The Rocky Mountain Institute, which some of you heard of, has been working on climate change for quite a while. They have this handy handbook online for cities to use where you get fast results, which can help you get more buy-in from the public and from the various stakeholders, and examples of cities that have done these things. So again, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can learn from this, and these other resources too. Probably most of us on this call know about the book Drawdown. Just wonderful, been very influential. There's also a project Drawdown that grew out of that. You can find more information online, and they share a lot of resources and successes that includes what people can do locally as well as beyond. And then ICLEI I mentioned before, because they're the ones that have that clear path method for coming up with a greenhouse gas inventory. And they provide, this is a nonprofit that provides resources for local governments across the country. And so they have a good guide. Then California, and again, I lived in Stockton, California for 12 years and was very involved with climate action there. There's quite a few resources in the state that are applicable across the whole country. Like there's interactive maps, not just for California, but for the whole country, like by zip code, I think, for what the greenhouse gas emissions are, and various resources. And this portal can lead you to those. Again, with the greenhouse gas inventory, one of my colleagues, Chris Jones at UC Berkeley, was involved with developing some of the state of California resources that cover the whole nation. And he has made the point that quite often an entity like a municipality that's trying to do a greenhouse gas inventory can get free information. It's out there, you just need to know how. And this portal is one of the places that can lead you to those resources. So it's good to know about, quite apart from, whether you live in California or not. And of course, the funding wizard, again, is good for almost any group to know about. Cities, of course, but nonprofits and businesses too, and school districts. Yeah, so. Okay, I'm also going to briefly mention 2 additional resources that are good complements, I think, to the Boswell book. This one was written by 3 people who were city sustainability directors for large cities like Chicago, my hometown. But a lot of what they write about applies to cities of any size. And they include what has worked and lots of examples. It's very practical. Swinging the finances. And of course, there's coverage of that in the Boswell book too, Climate Action Planning, that I focused on. But there's really a lot on that here, and making the case internally and seeing the savings and then reinvesting the savings you get from like an energy efficiency drive for all your government buildings into other climate actions. And so that I think is really helpful. Again, cost benefit analyses like the Boswell book covers as well, and lots of examples in this book. Incentives, and I was really pleased to see coverage of one of my part of my own area in psychology, performance management, where you use non-financial incentives like recognition, and it's a really efficient way to get people on board and incentivize the change that you need. And measuring all that and looking at the barriers. There's a whole thing called barriers analysis. This whole book's just on that. What are the barriers to the changes that need to be made? And then how do you address those barriers? And there's some of that in the Boswell book, but this book I think does an especially good job on addressing that. And prioritizing, that's covered in the Boswell book. There's also a whole chapter on that in this book. It's well known in the field of the behavioral side of sustainability, and it's quantified. So you get numbers again. What's the probability of adoption of the change that you want to make, whatever it is? If it's a really low probability and it's going to take a lot of effort, then maybe do some low-hanging fruit instead. The potential impact, obviously, if it's going to be high, then that should be prioritized over something that you might be able to do pretty easily, but it's not going to have much impact. And then the existing levels. Okay, maybe something's good to do, but then when you take your measurements, get your metrics, you find that it's not as bad as you thought it was. It's actually we're actually doing pretty well with this. And so maybe we don't need to expend a lot of resources on this aspect of climate action or adaptation. Maybe we should focus on other things. And there's a very good planning guide in the Tools of Change website, which Nikki mentioned in her introduction for me. I am involved in this. This is a resource that's freely available to all and has been for over 20 years. And I think it's really good. At the bottom there are all the steps that they have for planning climate action. You click on that and there's a web page with lots of information and examples. I think it's really useful. And there's lots of examples under the case studies section. They call it case studies, but some of them are quasi-experiments or actually full experiments. They're all data-based. And I picked out this example from a city that wanted the school district to get more of their kids walking, bicycling, or carpooling to school rather than being driven. And you can see at the bottom there with the results that they had a really significant impact with this program. They emphasize safety, and all the information is given if you click on this of what they did and how you might replicate this in your community, and hyperlinks and people who can serve as resources, and all through all the aspects of climate action. This and other resources like it, provide role models so that we can scale up quickly, which we need to do if we're going to meet this challenge of cutting back on greenhouse gas emissions fast enough so we'll have a good sustainable future for next generations, and for developing nations right now, of course, are suffering disproportionately. So yeah. Okay. So closing thought here. I hope I have inspired some of you to be interested in looking into this book. And I would be happy to take questions.
Mark, I see your hand up.
Well, this talk has been precisely on point of what I have been thinking about and struggling with for the last couple of months, which is how to bring about for our climate committee in Kalamazoo Township, bring some ideas to implementation in the face of some opposition and just some structural barriers. So I am going to buy the first book that you went into depth with for all the members of my committee.
Oh, I have a couple. And if anybody wants to throw in a question, just raise your hand and I'll call on you. HOA, does the book talk at all about how to get around HOA restrictions so that you can implement some of your plans?
Oh, boy. Yeah, that's a tough one, isn't it? I know some of you have been working on that. Yeah. I don't remember that there's an in-depth discussion of that. It probably does get mentioned at some point, I think, because it is pretty thorough, but I don't know that it would be the best resource for that now. But some of the resources that it lists probably do discuss that, because certainly people elsewhere have been able to make that change happen. I know in the state of California, they passed laws so that HOAs can't prevent you from putting solar panels on your roof, for example. And don't we have something like that now in Michigan or locally? Some of you know more about that, maybe can comment.
Oh,
And
Rick might.
HOA is what, please?
Oh, a homeowner association. Sorry. Thank you, Tim.
Rick, do you have an answer for that question?
Yeah, I'm affected by that because the HOA prevented my being able to put solar panels on. So I am aware of legislation that was introduced by Representative Puri in Michigan, and it's passed through the House, and it's sitting in Sean McCann's Energy Committee in the Senate. So, I mean, if they didn't make any changes to it, they could probably get it done, but we'll see what happens later in this year. And then also with Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association, I've been working with their education committee to draft a model, kind of a policy for homeowners associations to adapt, so that if the legislation does pass, then which requires the associations to have a policy, then we would have a draft policy ready for them and help them do that. And if the legislation does not pass, it's a good idea to then present to the homeowners associations anyway, to convince them that maybe it's okay, here, this would address all your concerns. Unfortunately, the legislation deals only with single family homes and not condominiums or joint places, but other places in Michigan have addressed their HOAs voluntarily and been successful in being able to put solar panels even for common buildings. Thanks.
Rick, do you know if that legislation covers anything besides solar panels? Like I was reading an article about somebody wanting to change their lawn to more native plants in an HOA, and they were stopped from doing that.
Oh, that's a good question. I know it has to do mostly more broadly with energy efficiency, things that homes might use. They even have clotheslines listed as one of the things to allow. But native plants, that's a good point. And that could be a little more controversial too, but that is a very good point.
Okay. So HOA. The other thing is, does the book talk at all about working up? Okay. Ann Arbor, Missy wanted to put in community solar years ago already. And finally in the state, there's legislation dealing with it. But it took years for Ann Arbor really to apply enough pressure and get other entities joining them to get that legislation going. So does the book talk at all about working up and not just within itself?
Right. It's focused on what you can do locally. It mentions things like that. And I can relate again, in California, it took some time to get those kinds of laws through. And now community solar, if a community wants to adopt it in California, then that's their right. And then community by community, basically, more and more municipalities are adopting it. But as to the struggle to get the state law passed that made that possible, right? That's yeah. Again, I think it gets a mention, but it's not a major focus now. The focus really is on local climate action planning and what can be done within the larger framework with the lobbying obviously being an important part of making those policy changes possible that can make the local change happen more easily and get funding for it.
Okay. And then you mentioned, I think it was Boulder had a climate tax.
And yes, like Ann Arbor does too. Yeah, do you think that would be viable here?
Well, I was curious about that. Is that like a millage or a sales tax, or how did they get that passed? Because Boulder's a city, so they could do it as a sales tax in Colorado if they wanted to.
Right.
But
It's actually based on electricity use. I presume
Okay.
there's an exemption for low-income people, but yeah, it's basically a percentage of the amount that you pay for electricity.
Oh,
Yeah.
so it's actually a tax on that. Okay, that's
Does it
not what I
cover
was thinking of
business?
at all. Okay.
Does it cover businesses as well?
It covers
Or is that
business
just,
as well, yes. Yes, good question, Miriam, exactly. And I think Ann Arbor's is different. If I remember Missy's
Okay.
talk, does anyone remember? I don't think theirs works that way.
Well, they would have to get state approval to do that, I think. I mean, you can't just go and start putting taxes on, the city's guy. I don't even know if a city in Michigan can have its own sales tax. In Colorado, it can, but I don't know if it.
we
So-
cannot in Michigan.
And do you think that the way it's outlined in the book would actually help a business or like how do I want to say an organization make changes?
I do think so. I think a lot of the principles are readily generalizable very broadly. Again, the focus is on municipalities and citizen groups, but a lot of this would apply for school districts and businesses, for example.